Greetings, world of YouTube, fellow human beings, my existing subscribers, and my potentially new ones. Today I would like to talk to you about something that is different, although related, to my usual content on philosophy and Stoicism, and that is mental illness, specifically anxiety. If you live in a culture similar to mine, you've probably noticed in recent years that there has been a developing social consciousness of mental illness. We see this primarily in social media movements such as Bell Let's Talk, where on one day of the year we have people tweeting and hashtagging about either their experiences with mental illness or simply letting people know that they're there for people with mental illness. We're also seeing more ads on Instagram that pop up and let you know that there are services available for you if you happen to be mentally ill. You can text someone, call someone, 24-hour support, that sort of thing. And one of the themes to this emergent consciousness that I'm noticing is this attempt towards destigmatization of mental illness, trying to make people realize that mental illness is an illness, that it is beyond people's control, that people need to be mindful of those with mental illness because they cannot control it themselves. They need help from others to do so. And while that's all well and good, as someone who has personally dealt with rather severe, debilitating anxiety in their life, I find some dimensions of this discourse rather irritating and, to be frank, neither pragmatic or fruitful. So what I'd like to discuss today, for myself and for anyone out there who may be watching this and either has or is dealing with mental illness or specifically anxiety, I would like to discuss the different ways that people come by anxiety, how it develops, as well as my own experience with it, and some pragmatic strategies to overcoming this situation. Because as much as the discourse the social discourse that is, may lead you to believe that you need external help, I don't believe that's always the case. I think people can give you advice, but with certain kinds of anxiety, it is 100% in your power to overcome it. It's not to say it's going to be easy, it's going to be immensely painful and you will suffer tremendously, but it can be done. And the point of this video is to share with you how I did it and how you can also do it. So the first thing I'd like to discuss then are the ways by which people develop or come by anxiety. And the first notable point about that is that in the same way that doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists do not fully understand the mind yet, so too they do not fully understand mental illness yet. It is still in the process of being understood and discovered in the same way that the connection between consciousness and the brain is still being discovered. However, from the research that does exist, the ways by which people come by anxiety do cluster into three sort of groups. And that is, one, brain chemistry. So what is the composition of the chemicals in your brain? How do they interact and affect your consciousness? And that includes if you've already had a history of mental illness in your family that may predispose or possibly guarantee you to develop such a condition. The latter two, however, more so fall into a similar category of their own here. Personality and life events. So what kind of person are you? How much do you fixate? What kinds of things do you think about? And similarly, the third is life events. So what has happened in your life that in turn has affected your personality and how you think about things, what you think about every single day. So these three distinctions here between brain chemistry, personality, and life events, while we should say that these are linked, can be further divided into situational or uncaused. So that is to say, if your anxiety is uncaused, that is, there is no sort of rational starting point for you to have anxiety, we would say that that would be linked with brain chemistry, that you have an authentic illness that is caused by an imbalance of chemicals in your brain or an abnormally developed region of your brain. However, we would say you have situational anxiety if you experience anxiety based on your life events or based on the kind of person you are and the kinds of things you think about. So then when it comes to the commonly accepted methods of treatment for anxiety, that is based also on these two categories of uncaused or situational. And that is to say, if your anxiety is uncaused or otherwise caused by nothing, no life events or anything of that nature, but rather likely by an imbalance of chemicals in your brain or an abnormally developed region of your brain. It said that the best treatment is either medication or more likely medication paired with therapy. And if your anxiety is situational, i.e. developed by life events and the way that your personality experiences those life events and the way that your personality develops through those life events, it leans towards therapy, but again, in more aggressive cases, it leans towards both. So then, the reason why the best treatment for uncaused anxiety is first most medication is, of course, to correct those things in the brain which consciousness can't through medication. What I want to focus on for the remainder of this video is situational anxiety. So some degree of situational anxiety is absolutely normal for everyone in their everyday lives. For all sorts of things, of course. This much should be very obvious. However, the principle of neuroscience which leads situational anxiety to become more exaggerated and more seemingly out of one's control is the principle of neuroplasticity, which is to say that neurons that fire together wire together. And this means essentially that the more that you react to specific situations in specific ways or similar ways, the more your brain will wire to sort of automatically respond to situations in those ways. So which is to say, if before I go out, I start to worry about what people are going to think about how I look, and I start to do that without controlling it, or that is, if I don't put the thoughts out of my head, the more every single time I'm about to go out, my brain will cause me to recurrently think in those patterns, to worry. And that worry will continue to grow. And that applies to virtually anything one becomes concerned about. The more that you respond to specific stimuli in a certain way, the more your brain will be trained to consistently respond to that stimuli in that way. And that is how situational anxiety more or less develops into more severe anxiety. However, the other side to neuroplasticity, or the other application of the same principle that neurons that fire together wire together, is that you can train your brain to respond to stimuli in different ways. So that is to say, consciousness can overcome existent patterns and force new patterns. And that is why people with situational anxiety, even the more severe forms, are first most recommended therapy to retrain and rewire their brains, rather than taking medication, although, as I said, in severe cases, medication is still recommended alongside therapy. So it then stands to reason that the most important dimension to overcoming situational anxiety is your own consciousness. It is your own response to stimuli, and your ability in the moment to overpower the ways that your brain has been trained to react and to force new connections, to force the beginning, to take that first initial step. So before I move into discussing the strategies to overcoming severe social anxiety, severe situational anxiety, it is necessary to share with you my own experience with it. So what was the precursor to taking the steps that I took to overcoming it? What was it that I had to overcome, and how does it relate to perhaps what you might be dealing with or what you've dealt with in your life? And could it be helpful for you? So I think a good way to determine that is by judging my own experience. So my anxiety began fairly early on. I experienced a number of traumatic social events, was subject of a number of traumatic events, and they deeply altered the way that I looked at myself, the way that I thought about myself, the way that I looked at other people, and the way that I thought about other people, and therefore the way that I myself interacted with other people. I developed a severe fear of other people's judgment, and particularly of confrontation with other people, such that whenever I felt I was being heavily judged, or whenever a confrontation came upon me, I began to tremor. Tremor, not just a shake, but I mean a full body. My hands are shaking, my arms are shaking, my legs are shaking, and it even came to the point where my neck would shake, like causing my head to shake as well, and it was completely uncontrollable. I found myself in situations even where I would be having that sort of anxiety attack of shaking, of the tremors, and people would be making fun of me as I was doing it and couldn't control it. And Fuck, I'm sorry, I haven't talked about it in a long time. Sorry. Suffice to say, it was an extremely hard time, and what made it so difficult was the fact that I felt like I couldn't control it. That I literally, in those instances, couldn't control it. And the moment of happening, and the moment where you're triggered, there's nothing anyone can really say, there's nothing you can really tell yourself. Situational anxiety, when it becomes hardwired, can reach the point where it is authentically out of your control when the triggering instances occur. So, suffice to say that if you live that way long enough, you likely, as I did, will reach a point of rock bottom. You'll reach the thought, or more accurately, the feeling, the sensation, that you just cannot live this way anymore, that something needs to change. And I went forth trying to change. I sought out a doctor, I saw some therapists, so I took medication and I talked to people, and ultimately I didn't like either one of those things. I did not like the way that I felt with the medication, and I did not think that the people that were talking to me were helpful at all, and so I basically took it upon myself. I started with the thought, what is wrong with me? What are the thoughts in my head that lead me to think this way? What are the originary points? And that led me, of course, to examine the traumatic events that had occurred in my life, why I developed the kinds of responses that I did. And in examining those events and my responses and the development of those responses becoming hardwired over time, I was able to see sort of the faults in my own thinking, where I was going wrong. And the remedy for me to those thoughts, to those places where I was going wrong, was to identify them and to meet them with the contrary reaction, with the opposite reaction, to train myself not to worry about what other people were going to think, to not worry about how other people were going to judge me, to concentrate instead on myself and on building the kind of life that I wanted to live, to concentrate on building the kind of person that I wanted to be. I know that may sound somewhat banal and everyday, but I truly believe that that is the starting point. For it was for me, and I believe it could be for other people as well. And I will repeat it, and that is to identify, to examine those things that have happened in your life, maybe that are hard to think about or that you haven't thought about in a long time, to walk through them, to understand yourself, why you've developed the way you have, and to work out, even if you have to do it on a piece of paper, what the responses are that you should be having to those stimuli that you've developed exaggerated or anxious-ridden responses to. The key, I believe, is to focus on yourself, but in a way that is different than the way that you have been doing. I truly believe that the advice for the way to move forward is that simple, but the execution is what is not. Just as it took time for your brain to hardwire in those specific anxious responses, it will take time to recondition yourself to think otherwise. And you're not going to do that alone. You're not going to do it closed off from other people. You will have to go out into the world and do those things that frighten you. So that whether that be a presentation, whether that be simple interactions, whatever it may be, you will have to do it, and you will struggle, and you will humiliate yourself, and you will feel probably pretty terrible about it at first. But the main thing I want to get across is that it starts and it ends with you. That is, that you will need to retreat into yourself. You will need to look at yourself, examine yourself, plan out, meditate upon what the contrary reactions are, what the opposite reactions are, what is the way you want to react. Think about it, spend time with yourself, be alone, but then take that and those meditations with you out into the world and practice it with a strengthened mentality. That, I believe, is the key, is strengthening, finding the way to grow strength from your weakness. because the anxiety is a weakness and it can be strengthened. And so this means you will have to do things that are uncomfortable for you. It's not like you're going to meditate in your room for 30 minutes and go out and be cured of your anxiety. It will take a very long time. For me, it took years. It took years of doing those things that made me uncomfortable, preparing myself for them first, and conditioning myself over time to respond differently. So to summarize then, I would say that my advice to anyone struggling in a circumstance that was similar to mine is to turn inward in a different way, to deepen your understanding of your circumstance, of how you became this way, to deepen your understanding of yourself, and from that point to deepen yourself as a person, to develop yourself as a person. And from which point, slowly but surely, I believe that your perspective will change. And as your perspective changes, so will your interactions with the world. In my case, I went from a outgoing youth who literally did the Napoleon Dynamite famous dance in front of her grade 8 elementary school, to someone who cried in the bathroom at lunchtime because they were too scared to interact with people, or who ran to the bathroom after shaking during a presentation so badly that people thought I was having a seizure, to teaching classes in university, to making YouTube videos, to having everyone who meets me have no idea what was ever the case for me. And I will tell you that as the years go by and as you get better and as you heal, there will always be a scar. So I debated taking out the part where I got a little emotional there, but I think that I will leave it in, because it shows you that you can close the wound and you can turn it into a scar. But you, as someone who's suffered with anxiety, will always have that scar. It'll always be a part of who you are. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a source of strength. It can be a recognition of what you've overcome. So I know that my advice was simple, but I hope very sincerely that if there is anyone watching this who is currently struggling with anxiety similar to mine, that you will find some value in the words that I've given you, and have the courage to turn into yourself and start to learn how you can change, because I promise you that you can gain control of yourself and of your life. It's just a matter of being fed up enough and having the willpower to do it. And it will take time, like I said, and the scar will remain, like I said, but the day will come, so long as you try, that you don't shake anymore.